Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. I would like very much today to talk about the Hellbound Heart, Clive Barker's novella, which he adapted into the movie Hellraiser. This piece of work is the world's first introduction to the Cenobites, Le Marchand's puzzle box, which opens a doorway into a realm beyond our understanding where pain and pleasure are commingled. It's a slim volume at only 128 pages. Even a slow reader like me can read it in one sitting, so it's perfect if you've got an afternoon or an evening spare to sit down, cozy up with, especially as the nights are drawing in, and you can read the whole thing from start to finish, as you would expect with such a slim volume. There's not much fat on it at all. It clips along at a fair old pace, but as you would imagine with a writer like Clive Barker, some of those phrases, some of those images, and an awful lot of those expansive ideas that he has put an awful lot of meat onto the small skeleton of this little story. It's very interesting to see what changes he made from novella to movie, and for the most part I think changes made all for the better. I would tentatively suggest that the story told in the film, even though it hews very closely to his original story, is probably better. The tweaks and changes he have made are improvements. One of the biggest changes from words to pictures is absolutely the character of Kirsty. Everything else here, the basics are exactly the same. The novella starts off with Frank solving the puzzle box. The Cenobites come and they take him to their realm of what they consider to be pleasure. What's very important here in this story, and something which was very quickly lost in the Hellraiser franchise, I think after the second film really, is that the Cenobites here are not demons. They're not aligned at all with the Judeo-Christian axis of good or evil. They're completely amoral. They are absolutely sort of explorers in other dimensions, outer dimensions of experience, and bring what they have learnt to our tiny little sort of cramped understanding of pleasure and pain here in this dimension. We've got absolutely nothing to do with hell. There's no God, there's no devil at all, and that is something that slowly got leached out of the franchise, and I think that's an element of the Cenobites that was reintroduced back into the 2022 movie, the Hellraiser movie that was released this year. The Cenobites once again presented as kind of almost unknowable creatures of outer dimensions who have infiltrated ours by invitation through solving this puzzle box. We have Julia and her husband in the book Rory, in the film Larry, move into this house that they have inherited. Rory cuts himself, spills blood on the same floorboards where Frank died, and Frank uses that as his little chink, his way to get back through to our world, to escape the clutch of the Cenobites, and for that he needs blood to rebuild himself. So Julia, who had an affair just before her wedding with Frank, agrees to kill for him and essentially feeds people to him so he can rebuild himself. All of that's exactly the same. Kirsty is in the story as well, except in the novella Kirsty is sort of a spare wheel, if you like, someone who sort of pines from afar, a bit of a sad sack for Rory. She's got clearly a history with him. They're friends, but not much of that is penciled in. So there's a strange sort of kind of love triangle going on, although I wouldn't even call it a triangle because Rory is completely besotted with Julia and completely oblivious to the fact that Julia has now hitched her wagon to Frank. And that dynamic isn't as strong as he changed it in the film, having Kirsty be Larry's daughter and Julia becomes her stepmother. Instantly, a much more delicious web of interrelationships. instantly you buy much more why Kirsty would insert herself into this relationship and have, so to speak, skin in the game, because she's concerned for the well-being of her father and doesn't want to see her stepmother screwing him over. They get to play deliciously with fairy tales and the wicked stepmother and the two brothers, Larry and Frank, and one's the good seed and one's the bad seed, and all this kind of grim folklore stuff that they get to play with in the film just absolutely isn't there in the novella. And instead you have to sort of go along with the idea that Kirsty is quite happy to sort of pine from afar for Rory, even to the point where she will meddle for him in Julia's affairs, and in that way get drawn into this circle of danger. It's not quite as watertight. It doesn't feel as strong. There's not as much there to play with as he plays with in the movie, of this dark fairy tale aspect, which he's managed to concoct just by changing Kirsty's character and her relationship to the other characters. But essentially, apart from that minor change, everything in the novella is as it is in the movie. I've been wanting to reread it for a long time, and will admit that I finally got round to picking it up now, because I have turned my mind towards the idea of moving on from short stories, which I've been writing for the last couple of years, and trying my hand at something a little bit larger. I'm not ready to tackle a novel yet, so the novella sits there beckoning me, like Le Marchand's puzzle box itself. So I thought, well, I'm going to read some novellas to sort of get my head around the particular form. And I must admit, rereading The Hellbound Heart with an eye to that, I was quite stunned and taken aback by quite how sparse this story is. That's going to sound silly to say. It's a slim story. It's not as big as a novel, so of course it's going to be a little bit like that. But what really intrigued me about the nuts and bolts of the story is how certain scenes, some scenes are intensely short, just a couple of paragraphs, just maybe even a conversation between a couple of characters. But everything is there for a reason. Everything tells you a little bit more about a certain character's point of view, pencils in a little bit more of their backstory, tells you more about their motivation. So even the smallest brick in the wall is there to drive the story forward, and there is really no fat on it. Sometimes even, dare I say it, perhaps slightly to the detriment of the story. I think while you're reading it, a couple of times characters just come to realizations or conclusions or make decisions because they really have to. There's no space in this story for them to hem and haw about should I, shouldn't I. So Julia fairly quickly decides, yes, I will kill for Frank because I want Frank. Now, I'd say that Barker does a pretty damn good job of filling in her motivation and putting us in her headspace to take us along with that journey. A little bit later on, Kirsty makes the decision of, yes, I will spy on Julia for Rory, and then subsequent to that, yes, I will make this deal with the Cenobites to save myself and get Frank back in their clutches again. And because Kirsty is one of these sort of margin characters until the very end, her turn in the story holds a little less weight, it's a little less believable, because make no bones about it, this is Julia's story. In having it written down, it's clearer even than it is in the movie. We spend more time in Julia's headspace than anyone else's. She is absolutely front and centre, the main character of this, as was his intention for the movie. Now, making Kirsty, giving her blood connections to Larry and connection through marriage to Julia, gives him an absolute shorthand for her towards the end of the movie to make those kind of decisions and make the deals with the Cenobites, and you can absolutely get behind it and buy it when it's written down and everything is so sparse. Suddenly moving from being very much Julia-centric and in her head and her point of view for the majority of it. We jump around here and there. We get a little bit of Kirsty towards the start, but then towards the end, unfortunately, when Kirsty's grand designs are coming to fruition, we kind of have to jump into Kirsty's head, and we haven't spent nearly as much time in there, and suddenly it's a rush towards the end, and all of a sudden it doesn't feel quite as earned, maybe in the novella, as it does in the movie, just by making that slight little change to Kirsty's character. As it is, though, as wonderfully sparse as his storytelling is in this through necessity, because that's the form, some of the images he comes up with, the turns of phrase, he's so incredibly poetical in this very short piece. His imagery, his ideas, even hinting at maybe the philosophy of the Cenobites, who are barely in this. Just a whisper of the Cenobites, even less than they are in the first film, and they're hardly in the first film. I think maybe 8 or 11 minutes of screen time in the film over the entire run of this. Almost barely a whisper of Cenobites here. They're so mysterious, they're so alien, I guess because he has the advantage here of forcing us to imagine them, and when you have to present them to a camera, they're solid, they're there. That's what Butterball looks like, that's what the Chatterer looks like, the female Cenobite, what came to be known as Pinhead, the lead Cenobite. Here, never even named, not even called the lead Cenobite, not even called Hell Priest. The character that is most closely aligned in this to Pinhead is in one scene, which is quite remarkable. It's more about the ideas and the expansive ideas and what he can do in 2 or 3 sentences in an attic room of a house somewhere. Well, it could be anywhere. It could be in America, it could be in England, could even be in Europe. He can transport you to worlds beyond worlds in the space of a few lines, and that's Barker's real gift. So I think what you get with the movie is a real solidification of the story, and the story he tells is that much stronger in the movie. But if you want some of his wilder ideas, if you want some of the cracks of doors that open into worlds beyond, you simply cannot put on film. I absolutely recommend sitting down for an afternoon or an evening and reading The Hellbound Heart.
I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.